Ever wondered what getting drunk was like? Before happy hours, cocktail bars, and filtered selfies. Tonight, we're traveling back to a time when alcohol wasn't just for fun, it was a survival tool. In medieval Europe, people didn't drink to party, they drank to stay alive. From weak ale for breakfast to monks perfecting craft beer and smoky taverns packed with gossip, deals, and the occasional brawl, this is the wild, grimy, and surprisingly clever world of medieval drinking culture. So grab your favorite drink, preferably not from a plague-ridden puddle. Hit that like button. Subscribe if you enjoy quirky history, and let's dive in. In a society where life was short, harsh, and full of uncertainty, the tavern wasn't just a place to drink, it was the heart of the community. It was where deals were made, fights broke out, romances sparked, and local politics unfolded. All under the smoky, garlic-scented roof of the local alehouse. Forget polished wooden bars or printed menus. Most taverns were rough, dimly lit rooms, with straw-strewn floors, rickety benches, and an air thick with gossip, wood smoke, and questionable hygiene. The tavern keeper. They might clean the mugs, eventually, but nobody really cared. You weren't there for cleanliness, you were there for the atmosphere on any given night. You might find traveling musicians playing in the corner, a dice game unfolding near the fire, or if things got lively, a spontaneous pig auction happening between rounds of drinks. The menu was basic, usually ale, maybe a bit of cider, and if you were really lucky, or considerably wealthy, some wine. But nobody came for the drink selection. Came for the stories, the chaos, and the comfort of forgetting how miserable life outside those wooden walls could be. Drinking wasn't just a pastime. It was stitched into the fabric of medieval society. Religious festivals, market days, harvest, feasts, all were excuses to drink. And when people drank, they didn't hold back. But don't imagine everyone staggering around drunk all day. Despite what it sounds like, most people were just trying to survive. The ale, especially the weak small beer, was safer than water and essential to daily life. But on special occasions, that's when people indulged properly. And when they did, it got messy. Picture a packed tavern, ale flowing, tempers flaring, songs being butchered, and somewhere in the corner, someone face down in a pile of hay, regretting every decision that led them there. And while peasants and townfolk were drinking for relief or survival, the nobility had their own, more refined approach to intoxication. At grand banquets, the wine flowed like rivers, fine reds from France, sweet meads, and spiced concoctions that tasted as extravagant as they sounded. They toasted to health, to victories, to alliances, and to showing off just how superior their drink selection was compared to the commoner's ale. But at the end of the day, no matter your status, whether you were chugging small beer in a smoky tavern or sipping wine in a candlelit hall, you were united by one simple fact. Nobody trusted the water, but everyone trusted the booze, and trust. They did, perhaps a little too much. Hangovers, brawls, and drunken regrets were as much a part of medieval life as plowing fields or praying for good harvests. But in a world where famine, disease, and death lurked around every corner, who could blame them for finding comfort at the bottom of a tankard? So, next time you pour yourself a drink, whether it's a pint of beer, a glass of wine, or even just a weak cup of tirades in honor of your medieval ancestors, they didn't drink for fun. They drank because, in many cases, it was the safest stand. Sometimes it's the only option they had. And hey, if you enjoyed this dive into the ale-soaked corners of history, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe for more curious tales from the past, and drop a comment below. What's your drink of choice? Just promise me it's not straight from the plague-ridden puddle outside. Cheers. Of injury was almost guaranteed. Medieval drinking games weren't about neat little plastic cups or cleanly chalked rules. No, they were often rowdy, absurd, and completely unpredictable. much like the rest of life in those days. Some games were simple. Contest of who could drain their tankard. The fast tea, dangerous. Challenge, considering some of the ale was strong enough to knock you off your bench. Others involved reciting poetry or tongue twisters after each round, with the obvious consequence that by the third or fourth cup, nobody could understand a word anyone was saying. But that never stopped the laughter or the arguments over who actually won. But then there were games that blurred the line between entertainment and outright danger. One popular pastime, the who can balance on one leg after 5 tankards competition. Spoiler, the floor usually won. And let's not forget the ever-charming drunken wrestling, where intoxicated villagers, or even nobles, would grapple each other in the middle of the tavern or feast hall, cheered on by the crowd and scolded by whichever priest happened to witness it. Sometimes wagers were placed, and occasionally teeth were lost for the more literate or artistically inclined. There were also games of wit impromptu verses, riddles, or even philosophical debates that, fueled by mead and ale, often spiraled into incoherent rambling or declarations of eternal friendship between complete strangers. Naturally, the losers paid for the next round. The winners, well, they paid too with their dignity, usually, but beyond the games, the feasts and the questionable drinks, alcohol in medieval times served a deeper, more sobering role. It was a tool of survival, a form of social currency, and sometimes the only escape from the brutal realities of medieval life. In an era plagued by famine, disease, and near constant warfare, a warm tavern filled with laughter, music, and mugs of ale offered something more valuable than gold, a fleeting moment of comfort. Of course, not everyone could indulge equally. For peasants, alcohol was often weak, practical, and part of daily sustenance. For nobles, it was a symbol of wealth and status, a chance to display imported wines in extravagant goblets. And for the clergy, well, let's just say the line between sacramental wine and personal stash was often delightfully blurry. But no matter your rank, your accent, or your ability to hold your liquor, the rules were the same. Drink, but don't waste it. Celebrate, but respect the brew. And, ideally, try not to end the night face down in the pig trough, though history suggests many failed spectacularly at that last part. So, the next time you raise a glass, whether it's a cold beer, a glass of wine, or even a dubious homebrew, remember your medieval ancestors. They drank to survive. They drank to celebrate. And occasionally, they drank to forget. But through it all, their ale-soaked stories remind us that long before modern bars, cocktail menus, and happy hours, humanity has always found a reason to come together and raise a glass. If you enjoyed this slightly tipsy tour through history, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more strange and wonderful glimpses into the past, and tell me in the comments, would you survive a medieval tavern brawl, or would you be the one snoring under the table? Either way, cheers. Well, at least you were already in a holy place. In medieval Europe, drinking wasn't just tolerated by the church, it was quietly woven into the fabric of religious life. Sure, sermons warned of excess and taverns were scolded as sinful playgrounds, but in practice, ale and wine flowed through the monasteries just as easily as through the town squares. The saints themselves were practically honorary patrons of good times. Take Saint Bridget of Ireland, for example. Her famous prayer asking God for a lake of beer for the heavenly host wasn't some medieval meme. It reflected a genuine cultural link between faith, festivity, and fermentation. And Saint Arnold of Soissons, he became a legend for convincing people to drink beer instead of contaminated water during a deadly plague, a move that saved countless lives and, intentionally, made beer the health drink of choice. Science? No. Accidentally correct. Absolutely. Religious festivals like Christmas, Easter, and the feast days of countless saints were more than solemn affairs. There were also moments to feast, sing, and, unsurprisingly, drink. Kale, mead, and wine weren't just celebratory. They were practically ceremonial. Pilgrims making their long, dusty journeys often found themselves welcomed by monks who offered shelter, bread, and, of course, wine. Just enough to blur the edges of the road ahead and make the next leg of the trip feel spiritually fulfilling, or at least slightly less exhausting. And if you had a bit too much, lost your footing, and passed out under the altar, well, as far as bad life choices went, that one at least came with divine proximity. In medieval Europe, from the turnip inns of rowdy taverns to the hushed sanctuaries of monasteries, drinking was everywhere, part survival, part celebration, and entirely unavoidable. And that's where we'll pause. Well, don't wander off just yet. The wild, chaotic, and occasionally holy world of medieval drinking still has more to reveal. So hit that like button, subscribe if you enjoy strange, dusty corners of history, and let me know in the comments, would you be raising a goblet in the tavern or passed out under the altar? Well, if you passed out under the table, you were technically just resting in the presence of the Lord. Of course, the church condemned excessive drinking, but like most medieval rules, enforcement was wildly inconsistent. A noble might get nothing more than a stern sermon. A peasant tossed straight into the stocks for everyone to gawk at, and a monk, well, he'd probably just get reassigned to less liquid duties. But let's be honest, in a world where beer was safer than the water, someone, somewhere, was always bound to overdo it. And while medieval society absolutely loved a good feast and a bit of booze-fueled cheer, there was a limit. Once you crossed the invisible line from merrily tipsy to, say, shouting at goats and trying to joust a fence post, that's when the town stocks came into play. Yes, the dreaded, humiliating, wildly effective medieval blend of punishment and public entertainment. The stocks were those charming wooden contraptions that clamped your ankles, wrists, or sometimes even your neck, leaving you stuck out in the village square for all to see. You'd be exposed to the elements, the hecklers, and occasionally a very disappointed sheep staring at you in judgment. Getting put in the stocks for public drunkenness wasn't rare either. If you were loud, rude, vomited, somewhere sacred, or strategic, or decided to moon the local bishop, chances were, by dawn, you'd find yourself clamped into public humiliation, groaning under the early morning sun. But this wasn't just about punishing your liver, The stocks were as much about social shaming as they were about keeping order. Your friends, your neighbors, and that one nosy blacksmith's wife, they all got to stroll by, point, laugh, maybe throw the odd rotten vegetable, and remind you that your reputation now smelled about as bad as the sheep pen you woke up in. The irony, you weren't punished for drinking itself, only for being bad at it. Nobles could drink themselves into a stupor at lavish feasts with zero consequences. But if a cobbler tripped face first into a pig trough after 3 L's, suddenly it was a moral crisis worthy of a full public shaming. Authorities didn't necessarily fear alcohol. They feared the unpredictability that came with it. Slurred speech and stumbling inside your home, that was your problem. But out in the streets, that's how fights start. That's how riots begin, or worse, impromptu folk songs. Some towns even employed ale tasters. Their job, make sure the tavern beer wasn't too strong, or at least not stronger than the mayor's tolerance. Still, being drunk in public wasn't considered a serious crime. It was a mild disgrace, a social slap on the wrist. You weren't seen as a hardened criminal, just someone who got a little too medieval on a Wednesday night. After a few hours squirming in the stocks stiff, humiliated, possibly covered in cabbage, you'd be free to stumble home, sober, maybe, wiser, questionable, but definitely planning your next tavern visit. It's quieter this time, Hangovers in the Middle Ages were exactly as awful as you'd expect, minus the ibuprofen, and minus any sympathy from your neighbors. You'd wake up on a pile of straw, church bells blaring like Judgment Day, and there's a goat glaring at you because, apparently, you passed out in its stall. Again, so what did medieval folks do for hangovers? Well, for most people, they simply powered through it. You had chores to do, animals to tend, fields to plow. You didn't have time to lie around groaning about your head, feeling like it was being split open with a rusty axe. You muttered something about sin, maybe cursed your weak constitution, staggered back into the daylight, regrets and all. But of course, some brave or desperate souls tried actual cures. One of the most popular, raw eggs and ale, 'cause nothing quite says get better soon like drinking a lukewarm, slimy, frothy cocktail that somehow manages to insult both chickens and beer at the same time. Was never just about the ale or the meat. It was about the stories, the scars, and the questionable decisions you made along the way. And nothing captured that chaotic energy quite like a good old-fashioned bar fight. Nothing says recovery like mixing what wrecked you with what might also give you salmonella. That was the logic behind one of the more popular medieval hangover cures, raw eggs and ale, a slimy, frothy concoction that insulted both your stomach and your dignity in equal measure. Others swore by vinegar, fennel tea, or herbs steeped in hot water. But let's be honest, those cures usually tasted like grass and sadness. And if you were unlucky enough to have access to a doctor, and I use that word generously, you'd probably get a lecture about imbalanced humors, followed by the medieval cure-all, a good old-fashioned bloodletting, because nothing helps a pounding headache quite like intentional blood loss, right? For many, though, the solution was simpler. Just keep drinking. That's not a joke. The whole hair of the dog philosophy didn't appear out of thin air. Medieval folks figured if they already felt like death, they might as well top it off with a warm mug of redemption. The church, of course, had a different interpretation. Hangovers weren't just your body punishing you for poor decisions. They were God's gentle reminder that maybe you shouldn't have challenged the bishop to an ale drinking contest. The holy prescription, repentance, fasting, and possibly a dry, crusty loaf of bread, because nothing cures self-inflicted misery like guilt and bland carbohydrates. In truth, most people probably didn't even have a name for it. It wasn't a hangover, it was just Thursday. But regardless of what they called it, medieval drinking had consequences. You couldn't post your regrets on Twitter or blame your embarrassing tavern behavior on bad Wi-Fi. You simply got up, wiped dried ale from your face, and prayed no one remembered what you did with that loot last night. And of course, for as long as people have been drinking, people have been fighting. The invention of alcohol was immediately followed, likely within minutes, by the invention of getting punched in the face with a mug. Welcome to the chaotic world of medieval bar fights, where your pride, your pint, and your questionable singing voice could all land you in trouble. Taverns were not peaceful retreats. They were loud, smoky, crowded, packed to the rafters with people who'd spent all day digging ditches, shoeing horses, or losing arguments with their landlords. After 3 L's, even the smallest slight could spark a brawl. Spilled drinks, unpaid debts, dice games gone sideways, insults about a man's beard, or in some particularly tense towns, simply accusing someone of looking too French. Yes, that was a genuine insult in certain parts of medieval Europe. Technically, weapons weren't allowed in taverns. Realistically, that rule had about as much impact as a no-smoking sign in a 1990s dive bar. Daggers, clubs, even walking sticks became weapons the moment tempers flared. And if you didn't have a weapon, no problem. Tankards were heavy. Wooden stools, surprisingly effective when wielded with enough ill-fueled enthusiasm. Tavern fights could range from quick shoving matches to full-blown table smashing, teeth-loosening chaos. Sometimes the tavern keeper would step in to break it up, especially if furniture repairs were involved. Other times, they'd simply cross their arms, stand back, and mentally calculate the morning's cleanup bill. Local authorities rarely cared unless someone ended up dead, or unless someone important got bruised. If it was just two peasants swinging at each other in the corner while a lute player stubbornly kept strumming through the violence. Well, that was basically just another Friday night. But if a noble or a visiting merchant got caught up in the chaos, suddenly the law arrived. Stocks were prepared, fines were issued. You might even find yourself banned from the tavern entirely, the medieval equivalent of social exile. Still, despite the risks, fighting was baked into tavern culture. You came for the ale and the laughter. Sometimes you left with both. Some you left with a black eye and a story you weren't allowed to tell in front of your grandmother. Medieval. Drinking wasn't tidy. It wasn't polished. But it was real, chaotic, ridiculous, and utterly human. And getting one wasn't always easy, especially if the local authorities had decided to make life difficult that month. Rules varied wildly from town to town. Some places demanded strict inspections of ale quality. Others seemed content as long as the tax collector got his cut. But one thing was certain. If there was alcohol involved, someone, somewhere, was finding a way to profit off it. Brewing, selling, and serving. Alcohol wasn't just casual work. It was big business. For many women, especially alewives, it was also a rare opportunity for financial independence. Brewing ale at home and selling it by the jug or tankard allowed women to support their families or, in some cases, turn a tidy profit. But it also made them easy targets for scorn, suspicion, and those dreaded public shaming rituals, like being forced to wear a paper hat announcing your crimes if your ale didn't meet the standards. And let's be honest, nothing ruins a hard-earned buzz like a poorly brewed pint and a humiliating walk through town. Then there were the tavern maids, irking the floors of crowded, smoky alehouses. They poured drinks, cleaned up messes, and navigated drunken advances from men who'd spent more time with the ale barrel than with basic hygiene. It wasn't glamorous, but it was work, and for some, it was a stepping stone to marrying rich. Or at least marrying someone marginally sober. But make no mistake, women weren't confined to the brewing pots and serving trays. They drank too, especially at festivals, weddings, and on those long, exhausting days when the cow wouldn't cooperate, the kids wouldn't listen, and the only reasonable solution was a mug of something strong. Public drunkenness wasn't exactly praised in women, but it wasn't unheard of either. And if the ale was flowing, and the music was good, even the most respectable matron might be persuaded to join in a bawdy song or two. Beyond the taverns and kitchens, alcohol was deeply stitched into the medieval approach to health, or what passed for it. Sick, injured, looking vaguely pale. Someone would hand you a drink. Maybe it was your barber surgeon, maybe your grandmother, maybe a passing monk. It didn't matter who, alcohol was the go-to remedy for just about everything. In fairness, it sometimes helped. Not because it cured anything, but because when you're battling fever, injury, or the trauma of a poorly aimed jousting lance, a few strong cups of wine could at least make the situation feel temporarily manageable. Doctors, and yes, that word is doing a lot of heavy lifting here, routinely prescribed wine, ale, and mead for ailments of every kind. Got a cold? Warm wine? Headache? Wine with mint. Digestive issues? Mead with herbs and a prayer. Even monks brewed potent herbal liqueurs that doubled as medicine and mild entertainment. Strong, syrupy, and flavored with whatever looked remotely medicinal in the monastery garden. These concoctions were part digestive, part placebo, and entirely medieval. One particularly bold remedy involved soaking herbs in brandy and drinking it to cleanse the humors. Whether it cleansed anything other than your dignity is debatable, but numbness or unconsciousness worked just as well when it came to silencing complaints on the battlefield. Alcohol served a very practical role. It cleaned wounds, or, more accurately, it stung like hell while distracting you from the guy hacking off your leg with a saw that, moments earlier, might have been used for firewood. If you were lucky, they gave you a strong drink before the amputation. If you weren't, well, at least the bottle made the rounds afterward. But alcohol wasn't limited to physical wounds. It was prescribed for melancholy, plague symptoms, childbirth, recovery, spiritual despair. Basically, if you were breathing, someone thought a drink might help. Did it work? Occasionally. Did it make things worse? Also, occasionally. But hey, in an age where leeches were basically part of the medical staff and bloodletting was still considered cutting-edge science, alcohol was at least pleasantly wrong. And where there's alcohol, there's always a government figuring out how to make money off it. Medieval rulers quickly realized that brewing, selling, and serving booze wasn't just a social pastime, it was an economic goldmine. Jobs were created, revenue was generated, and local officials had yet another excuse to invent needlessly complicated laws. O'Connors were appointed official ale tasters, tasked with checking the beer for quality, legality, and acceptable froth levels. It wasn't the worst job, as long as you didn't mind drinking enough to risk out. Taverns, too, needed licenses to operate, and getting one often involved bribes, bureaucracy, or both. But once secured, that license opened the door to steady business and an endless stream of thirsty, occasionally rowdy customers, all eager to drown their troubles, celebrate their victories, or just survive another plague-ridden, livestock-challenged medieval week. What counted as a license in medieval times? Well, that varied wildly depending on where you were. In some towns, it was an official stamped document. In others, it was a handshake agreement with the local bailiff and maybe a sack of onions tossed in for good measure. But one thing was clear. If you served ale without permission, you could be fined, publicly shamed, or shut down faster than a poorly tuned lute solo at a village wedding. And then there were the prices. That's right, price caps on beer. Authorities would post a going rate for ale on wooden boards for everyone to see. If an alewife or tavern keeper charged too much, they were punished. At least, that was the theory. In practice, if your ale was strong enough and your cousin happened to work at the mayor's office, let's just say things got negotiable. Of course, no good thing goes untaxed, and alcohol was no exception. There were ale taxes, wine taxes, malt taxes. In some places, they even had drinking vessel taxes. Imagine getting fined simply for using a cup that looked a little too fancy. Welcome to medieval capitalism, where your mug could cost you. But, naturally, the rich and powerful found their way around it. Monasteries and nobles were often granted tax exemptions, because nothing says divinely inspired like not paying duties on your barrels of mead. Meanwhile, peasants were stuck paying levies on every weak, watery batch they brewed for family gatherings, even if it tasted like regret and sadness. Still, these rules didn't exactly slow the drinking down. They just made people more creative. Some taverns operated quietly, without licenses. Some brewers sold their batches off the record. Others simply bribed the right officials and prayed no one looked too closely at the accounting books. The result, a booming, slightly illegal, ill-soaked economy built on loopholes, gossip, and humanity's unwavering desire to enjoy a pint after a long, miserable day. But by the late medieval period, the drinking scene began to change. Slowly, subtly, and with far fewer pigs wandering into taverns. One major shift came with the rise of stronger alcohol. Distillation, that magical process that turns wine into something potent enough to clean wounds and erase memories, became more refined This ushered in the early versions of brandy, aquavit, literally, the water of life, and other dangerously strong spirits that made beer look like child's play. Meanwhile, international trade was expanding. Exotic spices, new brewing techniques, sugar, and eventually rum began to flow into Europe. With every ship that docked, drinking culture evolved. Mead and ale, the old staples, began to lose ground to wine and spirits, especially among the wealthy, now wanted to sip imported claret and pretend they were at the cutting edge of the Renaissance. Even taverns themselves got an upgrade. By the 16th century, some had evolved into inns and public houses, the earliest versions of the modern pub. Drinking was no longer just something you did to wash away a hard day's labor. It became part of travel, politics, even postal delivery. Yes, medieval mailmen drank frequently. Whether that made the mail faster or slower, well, history is unclear. Then came the Reformation, which poured cold water, a lot of guilt, onto Europe's favorite pastime. Religious reformers like Calvin and Knox weren't exactly thrilled about public drunkenness. Suddenly, drinking wasn't just recreation, which is a moral battleground. Taverns were accused of being dens of sin, sloth, and questionable fiddle playing. Governments cracked down. Licensing laws multiplied. Taxes climbed. Public drunkenness became increasingly criminalized. But let's be honest, the desire for a good drink that never went away simply adapted. Alewives were pushed aside by brewing guilds and mail-run breweries. Wine production was regulated by state officials. Spirits became fashionable in royal courts. Slowly but surely, drinking shifted from a basic necessity to a more controlled social choice. The Middle Ages faded into modernity. We gained cleaner water, better sanitation, and, sadly, slightly less mead. But what we started to forget was just how deeply alcohol had been woven into survival, celebration, and social life for centuries, etched with precision. Sometimes crude, sometimes poetic, but always laced with desperation and intent. A typical Roman depiction might read something like, "By the heart, the mind, and the loins of Marcus, so that he knows no peace until he comes to me." These weren't subtle requests. They were magical ultimatums, calling on the dark, restless powers of the underworld to do what charm or persuasion could not. And it wasn't just about lust. Roman love spells were deeply intertwined with issues of social standing and pride. Spurned lover wasn't just heartbroken. They were humiliated, and that demanded action. Love spells were a way to regain control, to reverse rejection, or to ensure that a wandering spouse stayed put, whether they wanted to or not. Magical potions were also popular, often prepared with ingredients that walked a fine line between seductive and sinister. Herbal brews might include henbane poppy seeds or belladonna plants, known for their intoxicating, sometimes dangerous effects. Honey, symbolic of sweetness, was often added to potions intended to spark affection, while more aggressive recipes could feature animal parts or bodily fluids ingredients, believed to carry potent spiritual links. One of the more unsettling Roman practices was the creation of pops, small wax or clay figures representing the target of affection. These were often pierced with needles, bound with string, or buried alongside written spells, effectively turning the object of desire into a magical hostage. The idea was simple: control the figure, control the person. The Romans even blended their magical practices with the legal system. It wasn't unheard of for love spells to be disguised as prayers or formal invocations, written in such a way that, on the surface, they seemed harmless, just a plea to the gods. But hidden within the poetic phrasing were commands, veiled threats, and desperate desires to bend the will of another. Despite the harsh edges of Roman love magic, it wasn't always born from malice. At its core, it reflected the same tangled emotions humans have always wrestled with: longing, insecurity, jealousy, hope. But where we might write a risky text or stalk an Instagram profile, the Romans called upon the gods, the dead, and the shadows to fight their battles of the heart. In truth, love in the ancient world was rarely left to chance. Whether in Babylon, Greece, or Rome, desire was seen as something wild and dangerous, but also something that, with the right spell, potion, or whispered curse, could be tamed, manipulated, or weaponized. After all, the heart wants what it wants. And in ancient times, people were more than willing to let magic make sure it got it. And that wraps up our dive into the enchanting, obsessive, and occasionally disturbing world of ancient love magic. If you found this as bizarre and fascinating as I did, go ahead and hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more weird history and hidden stories. And hell, let me know in the comments, would you ever use a love spell? Just hypothetically, of course. Controlled the dolls would be treated accordingly. If the spell was meant to inspire burning desire, the figurines might be placed near a flame, warming them gently to ignite the passion of the target. But if the spellcaster sought to dominate or bind the target's will, the dolls could be tightly wrapped in cords or sealed inside clay vessels, symbolically restricting the person's freedom and agency. Egyptian love magic was also intimately tied to their vast pantheon of gods and goddesses. Isis, in particular, was frequently invoked as the archetype of love, motherhood, and resurrection. She embodied both the nurturing and possessive aspects of love. Devotees would offer prayers, burn incense, or even carve her name into amulets designed to sway the heart of another. Hathor, the goddess of beauty, pleasure, and love, was another popular figure in these rituals. Temples dedicated to Hathor often housed priestesses who were believed to possess special knowledge of love spells and charms. Those desperate enough could consult these women for guidance, ingredients, or ready-made incantations. Although success, of course, was never guaranteed in love, even magically enhanced remained a fickle thing. One of the more unsettling aspects of Egyptian love spells was the blurred line between affection and obsession. Some spells openly sought to disrupt existing relationships, ensuring that the target abandon their current partner for the spellcaster. Others demanded complete emotional dependence, asking that the target eat, drink, and sleep with no peace until they submitted to love. Blood was sometimes used to seal these magical requests, either drawn from the spellcaster as a sacrifice or symbolically represented with red ochre. In extreme cases, grave dust or bone fragments were incorporated into the rites, killing to the restless spirits of the dead for assistance. A clear reminder that Egyptian magic walked hand in hand with death as easily as it did with love. Despite the complexity and occasional darkness of these rituals, ancient Egyptians saw love as essential a force, as powerful as the flooding Nile or the rising sun. To win it, keep it, or manipulate it was considered both an art and a divine right. But, as with all magic, there were risks. Angering the gods, miscasting a spell, or invoking a deity's wrath could lead to misfortune, illness, or heartbreak far worse than rejection. In the ancient world, love wasn't left to fate. It was coaxed, conjured, and, when necessary, controlled with incense smoke curling toward the heavens. Whispered invocations carried by the desert wind, and charms buried beneath thresholds to bend hearts and seal destinies. Because whether in Babylon, Greece, Rome, or Egypt, love was never just chance. It was a calculated, mystical, and often dangerous game, often laced with subtle enchantments, not just herbs for flavor, but ingredients chosen for their mystical influence. A pinch of ground mandrake in wine, a drizzle of honey infused with magical herbs, or bread baked with tokens hidden inside all, were methods to ignite passion or loyalty. In Rome, it wasn't uncommon for women to use food magic at banquets, quietly tipping the scales of affection while the wine flowed and the music played. In ancient Egypt, even perfumes carried hidden intentions. Scent was believed to influence not only the senses, but also the soul. A woman might apply a particular oil known to stir longing before approaching a man, the fragrant trail acting like an invisible spell weaving through the air. Meanwhile, protective amulets were buried beneath thresholds or hidden in clothing, shielding wearers from unwanted attention or harmful enchantments from jealous rivals. And it wasn't only the desperate or heartbroken who dabbled in love magic. It was used across all social classes, from peasants trying to win a spouse to wealthy aristocrats ensuring advantageous marriages, to even priests and priestesses invoking divine aid in matters of the heart. Love spells were just as common among the elite as they were among commoners, though the wealthy could afford more exotic ingredients and the services of professional magicians. Yet, for all its popularity, love magic was never entirely safe. It flirted constantly with taboo, crime, and the wrath of the gods. In ancient Greece and Rome, being caught using love spells especially, curses could lead to public shaming, legal penalties, or, in extreme cases, exile. Still, the risk rarely outweighed the burning desire to control fate, to tip the unpredictable scales of human affection in one's favor. Ultimately, ancient love magic reveals a timeless truth that across cultures and centuries, people have longed for love, feared rejection, and been willing to do almost anything to secure affection, even if it meant calling on dark forces, sacrificing personal essence, or manipulating free will. Whether whispered over a flame, buried in a graveyard, stirred into wine, or sewn into garments, love spells turned the most vulnerable of human emotions into a calculated, magical game, one that promised passion, power, and occasionally peril. Meals in the ancient world were never just about food. They simmered with intent. In Rome, women were known to stir aphrodisiacs into sauces, pour honeyed wine laced with herbs, or serve bread kneaded with whispered spells. Each dish wasn't just nourishment, it was strategy. One Egyptian charm instructed the spellcaster to breathe softly into the cooking pot, speak the beloved's name 3 times, and let the steam carry their desire. Dinner, in this sense, became a slow, deliberate seduction, each bite drawing the target closer to enchantment, their will softened like warm dough under practiced hands. Even cosmetics weren't safe from the allure of love magic. Ancient Greek women ground special herbs into their eye or lip pigments, believing the concoction would make their gaze irresistible and their lips practically bewitched. A surviving spell from the Hellenistic period even instructed women to recite verses from a hymn to Aphrodite while applying rouge to their cheeks, transforming an everyday act of beautification into a sacred ritual of attraction backed by divine favor. Clothing, too, carried hidden enchantments. A Babylonian text recommends washing a garment in enchanted water before presenting it to a potential lover. In doing so, the fabric itself became a charm, woven with subtle magic. Of the beloved accepted the gift and wore it, the spell was said to tighten around them like an invisible net, their affections tangled beyond escape. These everyday spells weren't grand spectacles or elaborate ceremonies. They were intimate, discreet, performed in kitchens, bedrooms, bathhouses, the ordinary spaces of daily life. For the ancients, love magic wasn't some distant, desperate act reserved for temple sorcerers or scheming aristocrats. It belonged to everyone, woven into the rhythm of existence. But with all their seductive promises, ancient love spells carried no guarantees. And when they did succeed, the consequences were often disturbing, even tragic. While hopeful spellcasters dreamt of blissful unions, its ancient warnings tell a darker story. The same charm meant to bind a lover could just as easily summon illness, madness, or even divine punishment. In Greece and Rome, philosophers and priests didn't shy away from condemning these practices. Theophrastus mocked those who relied on love potions, portraying them as naive and foolish. Pliny the Elder went further, dismissing love magic as dangerous superstition. Its practitioners deluded at best, criminal at worst, even within the magical texts themselves. Its cautionary lines were often scribbled in cramped, nervous script. Do not call upon this spirit unless you are ready to accept what follows. And what followed, often grotesque. One eerie Roman legend speaks of a man driven mad by a failed spell. For weeks, he wandered the streets at night, calling out the name of a woman whose face he could no longer recognize, her features replaced by a haunting void. In another cautionary tale, a desperate woman used a potent potion to ensure her husband's fidelity. But instead of securing love, she found herself the object of dangerous obsession. Her husband became violent, paranoid, convinced she was unfaithful despite her original intentions. The gods themselves, it seemed, didn't always appreciate being dragged into human affairs. In Egypt, invoking Hathor or Isis without proper offerings wasn't a shortcut to romance, it was a recipe for divine wrath. One recovered scroll warns, plainly, if she is not meant to love you, your heart shall know sorrow tenfold. A poetic, ancient equivalent of don't force it, backed by cosmic consequences. Rivals, too, were far from powerless. A targeted woman, suspecting herself the victim of a spell, could hire a counter-magician to unravel the charm or even hurl a retaliatory curse at the original spellcaster. These magical feuds could spiral, escalating into hex wars, with spells traded like daggers over months, sometimes years. Protective charms, salt circles, sacred chancel were part of the defense, turning love into a battlefield, both magical and mundane. Perhaps most chillingly, love spells often succeeded in creating obsession, not affection. The victim might feel physically drawn, unable to resist, but emotionally hollow, confused, enslaved to the spell's compulsion. Love became a haunting echo, not a true connection, a puppet show of desire, strings pulled by unseen forces. And yet, though the gods of Babylon have long fallen silent, their grave tablets crumbled into dust, the heartbeat of ancient love magic never truly stopped. It simply adapted. The spells, potions, and rituals of the ancient world didn't vanish. They repackaged themselves into whispered superstitions, folk traditions, and even modern self-help rituals that echo those ancient desires. Consider the so-called love potion. Modern science may scoff at the notion of aphrodisiac elixirs, but stroll down the shelves of health stores today may not advertise themselves as temples of love, but their shelves overflow with tonics promising enhanced attraction, deeper intimacy, or natural magnetism. Ancient herbs like mandrake, damiana, and ginseng still find their way into teas, oils, and supplements marketed to rekindle passion and revive that elusive spark. We may no longer whisper prayers to Venus or Ishtar, but the human desire to bottle love, to control longing, remains as strong as ever. In parts of southern Italy, folk traditions continue to echo the magical beliefs of the Greeks and Romans. Red ribbons tied beneath mattresses, herbal sachets tucked discreetly into clothing, and whispered charms passed down through grandmothers, all mere rituals, once practiced on classical street corners and temple altars. In the Middle East and North Africa, fragments of ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamian love magic still survive, hidden in talismans worn close to the heart or murmured in spells stirred into simmering pots. Even in modern pop culture, echoes of ancient love magic linger. Films, novels, and songs often portray the enchanted lover, whether it's a vampire compelled by a blood bond or a love potion slipped discreetly into a glass of wine. The trope of the love spell gone wrong remains a favorite, reflecting ancient warnings that passion conjured by force often unravels into chaos. more curiously. Modern psychology has uncovered uncanny parallels between ancient spells and scientifically supported techniques for increasing attraction. Mirroring a lover's body language using scent to trigger emotional memory, or timing confessions to align with moments of heightened emotion were those ancient spellcasters simply early practitioners of psychological manipulation, cloaked in divine language and ritual drama. Today, love spells are still for sale, though now they wear pastel branding and influencer-approved aesthetics. Etsy shops offer customized candle spells. TikTok hosts sleek manifestation tutorials that wouldn't seem out of place inscribed on a Greek papyrus scroll. The packaging may have changed, but the human impulse beneath remains timeless. In the end, ancient love magic wasn't merely about forcing affection. It was about seizing control in the face of longing, a desperate, beautifully human attempt to bridge the unbearable gap between desire and fulfillment. That impulse, relentless, universal, remains with us. We still chase that elusive alchemy, to be seen, desired, chosen. And if a little magic helps along the way, so be it. In ancient Greece, sport was not a pastime, it was sacred duty. A divine performance of flesh, will, and discipline before the gods. Nowhere was this more evident than at the Olympic Games, first held in 776 BCE in Olympia, a sanctuary dedicated to mighty Zeus. For over 1,000 years, Greeks from rival city-states gathered every 4 years, not for politics or warfare, but to chase immortality through sweat, muscle, and grit. These games weren't casual contests. Athletes trained for months, sometimes years, under the stern gaze of coaches, priests, and even philosophers. Before competing, they swore an unbreakable oath to Zeus, promising they had prepared with honesty and would not cheat. This wasn't mere formality. Breaking the oath could mean public flogging or disgraceful disqualification. Honor was everything. And if you're picturing dignified men in flowing robes, tossing a discus for, get it. Greek athletes competed completely nude. It was a celebration of the human form, yes, but also a symbol of transparency. Nothing hidden, no tricks, no armor, just raw athletic prowess laid bare for all to see, and the gods to judge. The original events were simple but grueling. Foot races, long jump, discus, javelin, wrestling, and boxing. Then came the pancration, brutal hybrid of wrestling and boxing with virtually no rules. Fingers were broken, eyes gouged, bones snapped. The crowd roared. Death wasn't common, but it wasn't exactly forbidden either. But the rewards for victory, legendary. A simple olive wreath crowned the winner, but upon returning home, they were treated like living gods. Some cities awarded victors free meals for life, front row seats at the theater, even exemption from taxes. Poets immortalized their names. Sculptors chiseled their likenesses into marble. For a fleeting moment, they stood shoulder to shoulder with the divine. But not everyone was welcome. The Olympics were strictly male territory. Women weren't even allowed to spectate, let alone compete. Their own festival, the Heraea, also held at Olympia, featured foot races for unmarried girls. But it paled beside the testosterone-fueled spectacle of the male arena. The Greek Olympics were more than mere games. They were a sacred fire, burning with ambition, discipline, and divine expectation. To run, to wrestle, to win, it wasn't just athleticism. It was ritual. It was legacy. Key, it was war without weapons. If the Greeks transformed sport into sacred ritual, the Romans did the opposite. They turned it into a blood-soaked spectacle where athletics and violence merged. And nowhere did this brutal philosophy shine brighter than in the gladiatorial games. Matches in tunics. Think again. Roman games were brutal performances of life and death, designed to thrill the masses, honor the fallen, and remind everyone exactly who held the power. Gladiators were typically slaves, prisoners of war, or condemned criminals. But despite their low social status, they became household names, admired and feared in equal measure. Some, like Spartacus, rose to legendary fame, becoming symbols of rebellion even as they were paraded into combat for the delight of roaring crowds, trained in special schools called ludi. These men and, occasionally, women were taught to fight with discipline, precision, and flair. The more theatrical, the better. Blood was not just an accident of combat. It was part of the entertainment, and the most famous stage for this blood-soaked drama is the Colosseum in Rome, an engineering marvel that could hold up to 50,000 spectators. Entry was free, paid for by emperors and politicians eager to secure public favor. Bread and circuses, they called it keep, the people fed and entertained. And they won't ask too many inconvenient questions about corruption, war, or collapsing infrastructure. Combat styles varied to maintain excitement. Some gladiators, like the heavily armored secutorers, fought with swords and shields. Others, like the nimble retieri, wielded nets and tridents, mimicking fishermen dragged into the fight. Each type had its own strengths, weaknesses, and costume, carefully curated to keep matchups unpredictable and thrilling. The games weren't limited to one-on-one duels. Mock sea battles, wild animal hunts, and public executions filled the schedule. It was athleticism meets theater meets horror. But not every fight ended in death. Contrary to popular myth, most matches concluded when one fighter conceded, killing. A well-trained gladiator was simply bad for business. They were expensive investments, trained and maintained like prized racehorses. Only the editor, the official sponsoring the games, held the power to decide if a defeated fighter lived or died. And no, the infamous thumbs up or thumbs down gesture. Probably a Hollywood invention. Ancient sources are ambiguous at best. Despite their blood-stained purpose, some gladiators achieved celebrity status. They received gifts, fan letters, yes. Ancient graffiti has been found praising their strength, beauty, and even their thighs, and sometimes they earned their freedom. Retired gladiators could become trainers, bodyguards, or minor celebrities, basking in the glory of their hard-won fame. But long before football, baseball, or basketball dominated global sports culture, the peoples of Mesoamerica played a game that was part athletic contest, part religious drama, and part cosmic allegory. Known today as the Mesoamerican ball game, or by its Nahuatl name, Olamalistali, this was no weekend leisure activity. It was a sacred rite, a political tool, and for some, a death sentence. Played by the Olmec, Maya, and Aztecs, the game involved a heavy rubber ball, sometimes weighing as much as 4 kilograms, that players had to keep in motion using only their hips, elbows, knees, or thighs. No hands allowed. The goal varied by region and era, but in many cases involved striking the ball through a vertical stone ring mounted high on the court wall. Considering the ball's weight and the limited body parts permitted, outscoring a single point was nothing short of miraculous. The courts, known as tlacheli or pak de pique arenas, were shaped like a capital I, with sloping sides and often surrounded by carvings depicting gods, warriors, and scenes of sacrifice. These were no ordinary playgrounds. They were cosmic stages where the divine and human realms collided. And it wasn't just about winning or losing. The ball game was deeply symbolic, representing the eternal battle between life and death, day and night, the gods and the underworld. In some mythological retellings, the game reenacted the journey of the hero twins from the Maya Popol Vuh, who descended into the underworld and played against the lords of death themselves. The most controversial element, ritual sacrifice. Contrary to modern myth, not every game ended in death, but many high-profile matches, especially those tied to religious festivals, did, and the sacrificed weren't always the losers. In elite contexts, The captain of the winning team was sometimes offered as a noble tribute to the gods ascending, in theory, to divine favor through death. Others argue it was the losers who paid the ultimate price. A public display of cosmic justice and balance. What's undeniable is the cultural weight of the game. It wasn't mere entertainment, it was theology in motion. The rhythmic thud of the rubber ball echoed through temple plazas like a heartbeat of belief, identity, and cosmic power. Meanwhile, when it came to physical activity, the ancient Egyptians blended leisure, ritual, and preparation for the afterlife. Sports weren't simply a diversion, they were reflections of cosmic balance, royal power, and divine order. While Egypt lacked the massive public arenas of the Greeks or Romans, athleticism was still nurtured with a spiritual undercurrent that made every movement meaningful. Wrestling was perhaps the most visually documented of all ancient Egyptian sports. Tomb paintings dating back over 4,000 years show pairs of young men locked in grapples, executing complex throws and holds that wouldn't look out of place in modern judo. These scenes weren't just depictions of physical prowess, they were symbolic acts of discipline, strength, and the maintenance of mat. It's a cosmic balance that underpinned Egyptian belief. These weren't staged performances, they were serious training exercises that emphasized discipline, coordination, and balance. Wrestling wasn't just for entertainment. It was an essential component of military preparation, used to train soldiers and elite guards in the skills of grappling, endurance, and controlled aggression. But wrestling also carried ritual significance, symbolizing the eternal struggle between order mat, the principle of cosmic harmony and chaos, the force that constantly threatened to disrupt the world. Archery was another vital sport, especially among the Egyptian ruling class. Depictions of pharaohs firing arrows from chariots, sometimes while the vehicle was at full speed, were not merely artistic records of skill. They were political propaganda, powerful visual affirmations that a strong, accurate pharaoh was a divinely approved one. Mastery of the bow wasn't just about warfare, was proof of divine favor and martial readiness. During grand festivals, kings would sometimes demonstrate their prowess by shooting arrows through copper rings, surrounded by cheering priests, nobles, and citizens. These public displays weren't just tests of marksmanship, They reinforced the image of the pharaoh as protector, hunter, and chosen representative of the gods. Rowing competitions also held an important place in ancient Egyptian life, especially along the life-giving waters of the Nile. Crews of young men competed in ceremonial regattas, their synchronized strokes reflecting discipline, unity, and communal pride. But these weren't just athletic contests. They honored the gods and often recreated mythical journeys, such as the solar bark of Ra crossing the heavens on its daily voyage. For the everyday Egyptian, sports and games took simpler, but still meaningful forms. Tug-of-war contests, leapfrog-like jumping games, and rhythmic group dances were common activities, blending joy with tradition. Children practiced balancing and acrobatics, while laborers already physically engaged through daily work further honed their strength through casual competitions. Athletic games during festivals served both as entertainment and religious observance, reinforcing community bonds while celebrating life in spiritual order. Interestingly, Egyptian women participated in athletic displays more freely than in many other ancient cultures. Wall paintings and reliefs show female dancers and gymnasts performing at banquets, festivals, and temple ceremonies. These performances, though not competitive in the modern sense, were undeniably athletic, graceful, and carried deep, symbolic significance. Significance often linked to fertility, divine femininity, and cosmic harmony. Meanwhile, in ancient China, sports weren't merely about physical prowess, they were tightly woven into the fabric of Confucian values. Military training, imperial, politics, and the philosophical pursuit of harmony between mind and body, from battlefield simulations to elegant courtly pastimes. Athletic activities served both the elite and the commoners, often reflecting deeper ideals of discipline, virtue, and cosmic order. Archery held a particularly exalted status in Confucian tradition. The nobleman, the scholar, and the soldier alike were expected to master the bow only as a warrior's weapon, but as a symbol of inner discipline and moral cultivation. Competitions were formalized and deeply ritualistic. During the Zhou dynasty, archery contests were held in ceremonial halls where etiquette mattered as much as accuracy. Participants bowed respectfully, recited prescribed phrases, and shot their arrows not to kill, but to demonstrate their virtue and self-control. Hitting the target was seen as a metaphor for achieving moral perfection. But not all sports in ancient China were so serene. Enter Jikyu, Chinese polo. Introduced during the Han Dynasty and reaching peak popularity under the Tang, polo became the sport of emperors, generals, and aristocrats, played on horseback with long mallets. It was fast-paced, thrilling, and surprisingly dangerous. Even Emperor Sezong of Thames reportedly died in a polo accident. Still, the sport remained beloved, embraced by both men and women of the court. Noble women in flowing silk robes galloped alongside their male counterparts, striking balls with astonishing speed and agility. In an age of rigid gender roles, polo briefly leveled the playing field. Military sports also flourished. Cuju, an early form of soccer, was originally developed to keep soldiers agile, coordinated, and battle-ready. Players kicked a leather ball through a net or small hole in a wall, using precise footwork and teamwork. Over time, Cuju evolved into a popular civilian game, spreading beyond military training grounds and eventually gaining recognition as the earliest documented form of organized football. Martial arts, too, found expression through sport. Shudo. Early forms of what would later be known as Kung Fu weren't just combat techniques. There were disciplines that cultivated both body and spirit. Sparring matches and strength demonstrations were common in military academies and public festivals, providing both entertainment and a showcase of martial skill. Even games like chess and wakit, the ancient game of Go, were seen as mental sports, testing not just strategy and foresight, but emotional control and philosophical thinking. In ancient China, the ideal sportsman wasn't merely strong or fast. He was balanced, restrained, and morally upright, embodying the Confucian ideal of harmony between action, intellect, and virtue. Meanwhile, the ancient Near East, spanning Mesopotamia, Assyria, Persia, and beyond, sports were rarely just games. Athleticism was deeply intertwined with power, divine favor, and military preparedness. Physical feats weren't celebrated in isolation. They were embedded within public rituals, royal image building, and the cultural machinery of empire. In Mesopotamia, the earliest known urban civilizations developed a wide range of physical activities, though they didn't formalize sport quite like the Greeks or Chinese. Athletic contests were often part of religious festivals or royal ceremonies, reinforcing the social hierarchy and connecting human strength to the favor of the gods. But for transcendence, the body was seen as both a vessel and an obstacle. The stronger, more disciplined it became, the better it could serve the pursuit of enlightenment. Early yoga incorporated strength-building postures, breath control, and intense focus, blending elements of physical training with philosophical inquiry. In this context, sport wasn't entertainment, it was a sacred pathway toward self-mastery. As Indian civilization evolved, the connection between athleticism, spirituality, and status deepened. Royal courts hosted archery tournaments and wrestling bouts, not just for spectacle, but as demonstrations of virtue and divine favor. Warriors were expected to excel in combat sports, while sages and monks engaged in yogic disciplines that, though less visible, demanded equal if not greater physical and mental control. In many ways, ancient South Asia blurred the lines between athlete, soldier, and ascetic. Physical skill was never isolated from moral and spiritual development. Whether it was a wrestler humbling himself in the Akara, an archer testing his precision at court, or a yogi perfecting his breath beneath a banyan tree, the ultimate aim was harmony within the body, within society, and within the cosmos itself. Meanwhile, in the ancient Celtic world, athletic contests were inseparable from tribal identity, mythology, and ritual. Among the Celts of Ireland, Scotland, Gaul, and Britain, feats of strength, speed, and skill weren't mere pastimes. They were declarations of honor, bravery, and sometimes supernatural favor. The ancient Irish epic, the Táin Bo Cúailnge, describes legendary hero Tuatha as not only a fearsome warrior, but a master of physical contests. He performed spectacular feats, leaping, spear throwing, wrestling that blurred the line between man and demigod. These heroic sports were echoed in real-world events like the Tailteann Games, a festival of athletic competitions, music, and ritual held in honor of the goddess Tauti. The Tailteann Games, believed to predate even the ancient Olympics, included foot races, chariot racing, sword fighting, wrestling, swimming, and stone throwing. But they weren't merely for sport. They honored the dead, united clans, and served as a proving ground for young warriors and future leaders. Celtic athleticism was also tied to warfare and survival. Training in swordplay, spear throwing, and horseback riding began young, preparing boys for the battlefield. But everyday sports, too, held cultural significance. Games like Shintaya, fierce stick cannball game played in the Scottish Highlands, or hurling in Ireland, were more than diversions. They were reflections of tribal competition, territory, defense, and raw communal energy. Physical contests among the Celts were often accompanied by music, feasting, and storytelling. Athletic ability wasn't isolated from cultural life. It was woven into festivals, rituals, and heroic tradition. To be fast, strong, and skilled wasn't simply desirably, was to embody the vitality of the tribe and the blessing of the gods. From the stone courts of Mesoamerica to the olive wreaths of Olympia, from the battlefields of Persia to the wrestling pits of India, the ancient world reveals a universal truth. Sport was never just sport. It was politics. It was ritual. It was preparation for war. It was a sacred theater where humans proved themselves to their gods, their rulers, their tribes, and sometimes to their own bodies. Every contest, whether played with spear, ball, bow, or bare hands, echoed with deeper meaning. Athleticism wasn't about recreation. It was survival, status, and cosmic alignment in motion. Transcendence, though often overlooked. In the ancient world, women did participate in sports though, usually under strict limitations and in gender-specific arenas. When women trained, competed, or performed physical feats, it was often tied to fertility, grace, or ritual purity, rather than public spectacle or open competition. Yet, across cultures, we find surprising evidence of female athleticism, sometimes celebrated, sometimes suppressed, but never absent. In ancient Greece, women were banned from the Olympic Games, not just from competing, but even from watching. However, they had their own festival, the Heraia, held in Olympia in honor of the goddess Hera. Young, unmarried girls raced barefoot in tunics shorter than the norm, their hair loose in contrast to married women's veils. There was no javelin or pancration. Victory was still rewarded with olive crowns and commemorated with statues in Sparta. Women enjoyed far more athletic freedom. Spartan girls trained publicly in running, wrestling, and throwing, often competing in front of male audiences. Their athleticism was seen as a civic virtue. Strong mothers produced strong warriors. While the rest of Greece found this shocking, Sparta viewed female strength as foundational to their militarized society in Egypt. Tomb paintings and reliefs show women dancing, leaping, and performing gymnastic feats, particularly in festival and religious ceremonies. These performances, though not competitive, were demanding and athletic. Some scenes even show paired female acrobats in midair, suggesting a long tradition of trained movement and physical artistry. Ancient Rome offers more complex examples. While elite Roman women rarely engaged in public sport, lower-class women and slaves occasionally performed in arenas as gladiatresses. Female gladiators, though rare inscriptions, confirmed their existence. More commonly, women participated in ball games, swimming, and equestrian training within private villas. In China, 2 women took athletic roles. Tang Dynasty records show noble women playing polo, one of the only major sports that allowed women and men to compete side by side. Dressed in flowing robes, they galloped through imperial courts, striking balls with precision. These scenes shocked later Confucian historians, but they demonstrate a brief window when elite women wielded real athletic agency. Though the crowds have vanished, and the dust of ancient stadiums has long settled, the spirit of ancient sports still pulses through the modern world. From Olympic gold medals to football stadium chants, today's athletic culture owes more than inspiration to the ancient past. It inherits its structure, spectacle, and even its soul. The Olympic Games themselves are a direct resurrection, revived. In 1896, the modern Olympics were consciously modeled on their Greek ancestors. Ceremonial oaths, laurel motifs, even the Olympic flame, a symbol once sacred to Hestia. The values may have shifted from divine favor to international cooperation, but the essential goal remains to celebrate the physical limits of the human body. Roman influence echoes in our love for stadium sports, massive arenas, structured leagues, theatrical entrances, over-the-top commentarial mirror the gladiatorial shows of the Colosseum. Even cheering sections, uniforms, can sports as national identity trace back to the imperial pageantry of Rome. Mesoamerican traditions resonate in how we link sports to ritual and symbolism. Though no modern game ends with sacrifice, we still speak of athletes as warriors, matches as battles, and trophies as sacred objects. Victory remains mythologized, from China's elegant archery contests to the disciplined training of Persian warriors. The idea of sport as moral education has endured. Modern martial arts continue to teach not just movement, but respect, restraint, and self-mastery, values rooted in ancient codes. Even forgotten games like Cuju and Krita have seen renewed interest as historians and enthusiasts rediscover the diverse origins of modern athletics. Ancient board games are reappearing in popular culture, not as dusty relics, but as reminders that competition isn't always physical. Perhaps most striking is how the ancient world framed sports as more than recreation. They were political tools, religious expression, and acts of identity. Today, when athletes kneel, speak out, or represent entire nations, we're seeing the same tradition unfold. Sport as narrative, its power and legacy. In short, the ancient world didn't just invent games, they invented the idea that through sport, humanity could aspire to greatness, not just strength or speed, but honor, meaning, and the eternal pursuit of something just beyond our reach. Paris, the city of light, romance, revolution, and art, but few tourists realize that beneath the elegant boulevards and iconic monuments lies another city, far darker and infinitely more silent. A shadow Paris stitched together by tunnels, carved into limestone and lined wall to wall with bones. This is the Catacombs, 200-mile underworld, filled with the remains of over 6 million people. The descent into the catacombs begins innocently enough. A spiral staircase leads you down, away from the noise of the living world. The air grows colder, the light dims, And then you're in the ossuary space where walls are literally made of human bones stacked with disturbing precision. Skulls are arranged in rows like trophies, femurs crosshatched in decorative patterns. Some tunnels even form shapes, hearts, crosses, columns. It's morbidly artistic and disturbingly calm. This macabre labyrinth was never built with tourists in mind. In fact, the catacombs began as limestone quarries dug to supply the stone that built Paris itself. For centuries, workers carved out vast chambers beneath the city, unknowingly creating the skeleton of a subterranean metropolis. But by the late 18th century, these empty spaces found a grim new purpose. But the catacombs are more than just a grim curiosity for tourists or a historical solution to overcrowded cemeteries. Over the centuries, they have become entangled with myth, legend, and urban folklore, cementing their place as one of the most mysterious locations in Paris. Whispers of secret societies holding midnight rituals in the depths of the tunnels have persisted for generations. Some say that artists and philosophers have gathered in hidden chambers to debate life, death, and the nature of existence by candlelight. Far from the constraints of the surface world, more unsettling are the tales of those who entered the forbidden tunnels and never returned. The labyrinth is vast, uncharted in places, and easy to get lost within. Despite modern maps and safety measures, it is said that the catacombs have claimed explorers, thrill seekers, and the curious, swallowing them into their endless maze. Urban legends speak of ghostly figures moving in the shadows, of whispered voices that echo through the darkness, and of doorways that appear and vanish, luring the living deeper into the underground abyss. Perhaps most chilling is the infamous case of a video camera discovered deep within the restricted parts of the catacombs in the early 1990s. The footage, later broadcast on television, showed a lone explorer wandering the pitch-black tunnels, his breathing growing frantic as he became hopelessly lost. The video ends abruptly. The camera found abandoned, but the man was never identified, his fate unknown. To this day, his disappearance fuels speculation about what lies beyond the known path's forgotten chambers. Ancient crypts or something far more sinister. Yet, the catacombs are not unique to Paris. Across the world, similar ossuaries exist, built from necessity or devotion. In Rome, the catacombs of San Callisto and San Sebastiano snake beneath the Eternal City, early Christian burial sites hidden from Roman persecution. In the Czech Republic, the Sedlik Ossuary, better known as the Bone Church, features chandeliers and decorations crafted entirely from human bones. A macabre yet strangely reverent display of mortality's artistry. But Paris's catacombs remain unmatched in scale and atmosphere. Nowhere else do you find hundreds of miles of underground tunnels so deeply intertwined with the identity of a modern city. They are a reminder that civilization is layered, that history is not just something of the past, but physically beneath our feet, quietly shaping the present. In many ways, the catacombs reflect Paris itself, a place of contradiction. Above ground, the city dazzles with art, beauty, and romance. Below, the silent remains of millions tell a different story, one of mortality, decay, and the inevitable passage of time. It's this duality that makes the catacombs so hauntingly fascinating. For those who descend into the depths, it's more than just a tour. It's a confrontation with the forgotten, a whispered reminder that beneath the cobbled streets, glittering lights, and grand boulevards lies another Paris of shadows, silence, and bone. Merchants, soldiers, and aristocrats alike call, stripped to status and death, their bones mingling in silent equality beneath the bustling city streets. Among them are victims of plagues that swept through medieval Paris, claimed by illness faster than the graveyards could receive them. There are those lost to wars and revolutions, their lives ended by swords, muskets, or the sharp edge of a guillotine during the bloody days of the French Revolution. Even monks from distant monasteries, buried for centuries, were eventually disinterred and brought here as space above ground ran out. No matter their deeds in life, whether virtuous or vile, all now shared the same fate, resting anonymously in the cool, silent dark. But while the identities of the individuals have faded, their collective presence shapes the soul of Paris. Tourists often marvel at the catacombs as a mere curiosity, a macabre attraction for thrill-seekers, but for locals, especially those whose families have lived in Paris for generations, the catacombs are a part of their heritage, grim, humbling, and unavoidable. It's said that on quiet nights, if you listen closely near certain street corners, you can feel a faint hollow beneath your feet, the empty space of the tunnels reminding you that beneath the cafes, museums, and apartments lies a hidden city of the dead. Urban explorers, known as cataphiles, legally venture into the restricted sections of the catacombs, discovering forgotten chambers, underground murals, and lost artifacts. These modern adventurers map hidden paths, but they also risk their lives. Many have been lost or injured in a treacherous maze, despite laws forbidding entry beyond the official tour route. The underground continues to lure the curious. The city's underground is also practically a network of old quarries, abandoned tunnels, and service routes that extend far beyond the ossuary. Paris's metro lines, sewers, and telecommunication cables all coexist in this layered subterranean world. A testament to how the city has grown, not just upward, but downward. The catacombs are many things: a tomb, a memorial, an architectural marvel, and a chilling reminder of mortality. But most of all, they are proof that no matter how grand, vibrant, or eternal a city may seem, beneath it all, time and death always claim their due. Midwives, soldiers, children, people who once packed the city's crowded neighborhoods, who trudged its muddy streets and prayed in its grand cathedrals. When their graves overflowed and cemeteries began to rot, they were brought here, becoming part of this vast subterranean ossuary. Some of the bones belonged to plague victims, most notably those who perished during the Black Death and later cholera outbreaks. Disease swept through the population so ferociously that cemeteries transformed into mass graves. Others died during famines, in fires, or during childbirth. Some had lain buried for centuries, their skeletons dry and brittle when unearthed. Others were scarcely decomposed. The process of relocating them underground was grim, unpleasant, and deeply impersonal. A practical solution, not a solemn ceremony. But not all the dead were ordinary folk. The bones of French nobles, clergy, and revolutionaries also found their way into these catacombs, especially during times of political upheaval, such as the French Revolution. When guillotines turned public squares into blood-soaked stages, countless victims were dumped into mass graves later to be moved underground. Some believe that prominent revolutionaries like Danton, Robespierre, or Camille Desmoulins were among those relocated to the catacombs, though no official records confirm their precise resting places. Down here, rank, title, and reputation vanish entirely. Then there's the mysterious Val de Grace quarry section, long believed to house the bones of monks and nuns. These religious communities, once buried in quiet convent gardens, were displaced like everyone else when Paris ran out of space for the dead. And then there are the children's smaller bones scattered among the stacks, unmarked, undated, silent, sorrowful reminders of lives cut short. By design, the catacombs erase identity. In death, all are equal: peasant, poet, plague victim, patriot, reduced to anonymous remains. The overwhelming anonymity of it all. 6 million souls reduced to geometry. Yet, in their stillness, they echo the weight of history. the price of urban life, and the fate of a city that once stood shoulder to shoulder, now lying skull to skull, while tourists shuffle through the official stretch of the catacombs. About a mile of carefully lit, neatly arranged tunnels. Beneath their feet sprawls a forbidden world, a shadow city of uncharted tunnels, sealed doors, and centuries-old passageways, crawling with graffiti, secret chambers, and the occasional underground rave. Welcome to the hidden domain of the cataphiles. Cataphiles are urban explorers who defy city laws to venture into the catacombs' forbidden zones. They slip inside through hidden entrances, manholes in parks, storm drains, or concealed basement trapdoors. Once within the labyrinth, they navigate by memory, hand-drawn maps, or sheer instinct. There are no signs, no railings, no phone signal, only the echo of your own footsteps filling the darkness. But this is more than reckless thrill-seeking. Too many cataphiles. The catacombs are a second city, a sacred space of rebellion, history, and creativity. For decades, they've carved out rooms in the tunnels, makeshift libraries, hidden art galleries, even underground cinemas. Some host clandestine parties deep beneath Paris, generators humming, speakers blaring, candlelight flickering over dance floors built atop stacked human bones. The cataphile community is tight-knit, fiercely secretive. Entry is often by invitation. Only newcomers, known as tourists, are tested for respect, caution, and survival skills. The golden rule: never disturb the bones, never deface sacred sites, never get caught, because this is all illegal. In 1955, French authorities officially banned unauthorized exploration of the catacombs. The risks were, and still are, very real. Many tunnels are unstable, prone to collapse. Some passages flood unexpectedly. Tight crawl spaces, mazes, and dead ends disorient even experienced explorers. Injuries, arrests, even deaths have occurred over the years. In one infamous case, a man went missing for days, found delirious in a remote tunnel, rescued only by search dogs. Yet, despite the danger, the authorities struggle to contain the trespassing. The underground network is simply too vast. Exhale. One entrance, and a new one is found. The cataphiles always return. For them, the catacombs are far more than piles of bones. They are freedom. It's mystery. A place where Paris breathes differently, where time melts away, where the living walk beside the dead, not in fear, but in reverence. Venture deep enough into the Paris catacombs, and silence fades, replaced not by voices, but by cryptic symbols. Messages scratched into limestone arrows, names, faces, poetry, a secret language carved by generations of cataphiles, quarry workers, soldiers, and perhaps the dead themselves, long before the catacombs transformed into a burial ground. Early miners etched dates, initials, and directional arrows into the limestone walls to mark their paths. Many proudly carved their names into the rock, leaving time-stamped signatures as proof of their presence underground. Others recorded practical information, marking exits, evaluating stone quality, or sketching simple drawings like pickaxes, candles, and ships. These were not random doodles. They were essential survival tools in a pitch-black maze. Once the catacombs became an ossuary, a new form of language emerged. Carved plaques from the 18th and 19th centuries began to appear, labeling the origins of the bones, which cemetery they came from. Some bore chilling epitaphs: "Where is death? Always behind you." Others quoted scripture or Latin proverbs, reflecting on life's fleeting nature and the inevitability of death, but deeper within the forbidden sections. Modern hands left their mark. During the 20th century, cataphile graffiti flourished. Some of these artworks are astonishing, elaborate murals painted by flashlight, turning entire walls into glowing skeletons, mythical beasts, and surreal portraits. Other markings served practical purposes. Arrows pointing to known exits, nicknames etched in stone, and cryptic codes like GV Chalik, 30 men to Monturich. An unofficial map of the tunnels exists, sand oral cartography shared among cataphiles. Locations have cryptic names: the beach, a sand-filled chamber, the cellar, the cathedral, the sandbox. Some walls earn their names from images etched upon them: the mushroom forest, the elephant room. Without insider knowledge, getting lost is not just possible, it is nearly guaranteed. Signs of human presence are everywhere. Candle holders carved into the walls, benches fashioned from scavenged stone, rusted hinges hinting at long-gone makeshift doors. Some explorers bring stencils or ink stamps to mark their visits, underground passports of sorts. Others leave poems, bottle caps, or tiny figurines, quiet offerings to a world of eternal night. In the catacombs, language becomes legacy. Every scrawl, arrow, or whisper of paint adds to an evolving story, a silent record that someone was here, someone passed through, and someone wanted to be remembered. During times of war, the Paris catacombs were far more than a macabre curiosity, became a hidden battlefield beneath the streets. While bombs rained above and regimes crumbled, the catacombs served as shelter, hideout, and strategic stronghold. For centuries, they were a crucial, silent player in Paris's wartime history. During the French Revolution, bones were still being transferred underground, but the tunnels were evolving beyond mere storage. The guillotine claimed heads by day. The catacombs absorbed the city's mounting dead by night. Whispers circulated that revolutionaries used the tunnels to move unseen across Paris, plotting in the dark. These passages were no longer solely for the deceased. They became tactical tools. In World War II, the catacombs entered a new chapter of intrigue. After Nazi Germany occupied Paris in 1940, the Wehrmacht and the SS mapped sections of the catacombs for military use. In one infamous instance, a bunker was built beneath Place d'Infrastructure, right within the tunnel system, hidden from Allied eyes, equipped with reinforced walls, supply caches, and communication lines. But the resistance was watching, resourceful and determined. The French resistance also turned to the catacombs beneath German-controlled Paris. Familiar with the tunnels, they used them to stage ambushes, smuggle weapons, and conduct clandestine meetings. Beneath the Nazis, French fighters moved like ghosts. The cataphiles of the Irods, already familiar with the unofficial sections, became invaluable. Their knowledge of hidden entrances and obscure pathways turned the catacombs into a guerrilla labyrinth. Evidence of their presence remains graffiti, ration cans, defensive structures carved into the stone. Bomb shelters were created within the tunnels during air raids. Ordinary Parisians fleeing Nazi crackdowns or Allied bombings sometimes sought refuge underground. There, in the stillness, families waited, bones beside them, war above hope, somewhere in between. After the war, many of these wartime sections were sealed or forgotten, but the remnants endure. A rusted door, a pile of gas mask filters, a scorched wall. Long before the 20th century, the catacombs held secrets, but in wartime, they became more a crucible of survival, resistance, and quiet defiance from a city that refused to surrender. Where there are bones and shadows, legends are never far behind. Then the Paris catacombs are no exception. Over the centuries, these tunnels have spawned myths, ghost stories, and urban legends that blurred the boundary between fact and nightmare. Once merely a solution to an overcrowded city of the dead, the catacombs have developed a dark folklore of their own. One of the most enduring tales is that of the Phantom of the Catacombs. Some say he is a long-dead quarryman, lost in the tunnels, and doomed to wander eternally, his footsteps heard, but his figure never seen. Others claim he is a plague victim, cursed to roam the ossuary in search of his lost family among the 6 million skulls. Whether spirit or metaphor, countless visitors report eerie experiences, disembodied whispers, sudden chills, and overwhelming nausea in certain parts of the tunnels, especially near untouched ossuary sections. Then there is the legend of the camcorder tape. In the early 1990s, a group of cataphiles allegedly discovered a video camera deep in a restricted area. The footage, later broadcast on French television, shows a man wandering alone through the tunnels, increasingly panicked, running, spinning, lost. Eventually, he drops the camera. His identity remains unknown, his fate a mystery. Dead. The lost explorer became modern legend, the man who never found the surface again. Other stories are more surreal. Some whisper of hidden rooms where bones have been arranged into chairs and thrones. Others speak of underground cults performing rituals in the shadows. In the early 2000s, a sealed chamber was uncovered complete with a working phone line, a fully stocked bar, and an underground cinema. On the wall, a chilling message: "Do not try to find us." Despite skepticism, the allure of the catacombs myths remains undeniable. Spy prey on the primal fear of darkness, the unknown, and the sheer weight of death. The tunnels are real but the stories. They live in the flickering candlelight, in the shifting shadows, the silence between footsteps, whether you believe them or not. One thing is certain. Deep beneath Paris, fear breathes Isliand. The catacombs never sleep. Each year, hundreds of thousands descend into this empire of death, not for funerals, not for rituals, but for curiosity, for selfies with skulls, for the strange thrill of standing among 6 million of the once living. It's a place where mortality is laid bare, yet now offered with a ticket stub and a brochure. The official ossuary opened to the public in 1809, intended not as entertainment, but as a space for reflection, a memento mori for a city, too, obsessed with life above ground. The visitors were led through by lantern light, sometimes accompanied by priests or scholars. Today, the lighting is brighter, the walls reinforced, but that same eerie feeling lingers, a quiet awe, a dread laced with wonder. Tourism has only swelled since the 19th century. Poets, philosophers, and artists have long been drawn to the catacombs. Victor Hugo roamed its depths for inspiration. Salvador Dali called it beautiful. And for many, it has become a pilgrimage, not merely to stare death in the face, but to marvel at how obsessively, how meticulously, death has been organized, stacked, displayed. Yet, the catacombs remain a source of controversy. Critics argue that turning mass graves into tourist attractions is distasteful, reducing human lives to morbid decoration. Others point out that most visitors fail to grasp the gravity of what they see. These aren't props. They're people, real individuals who once had names, faces, families now reduced to anonymous remnants of a forgotten past. Still, catacombs serve a purpose, one that's impossible to ignore. They remind us of scale, staggering number of lives lived before ours. They are, quite literally, the foundation of Paris, the dead holding up the living. Bones that once carried bread, books, or revolution now prop up the city's myths and sidewalks. And yet, when you finally climb the narrow staircase and emerge onto the bustling streets, Paris feels different, louder, brighter, more alive. Because the catacombs don't glorify death. They sharpen our sense of life, its fragility, its brevity, and its impossible beauty. Beneath Paris lies its deepest truth. Everything we build on bones. And one day, perhaps, the city will add hours to the archive.